writer.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Beautiful place, huh?
Yeah, best place I've ever spoken at, for sure.
So my name is Jair. I'm here with Petra, who I will give the word to in a bit. And before I start, I want to really thank Tony, because I've never been to Split, and today was my second day already, and it's a really beautiful city, so I don't see Tony, but thank you so much for, there you are. Thank you for the invite. Really looking forward to the boat trip tomorrow. And then before we dive into the topic, let's get back to the boat and the sea. If we all look there, we can see a really beautiful, really calm sea. However, seas, they can be really, really wild, like you see on this picture. Waves everywhere, unpredictable weather, a lot of things that you cannot control. So as a captain, you cannot control the sea, but you can control who you bring with you on the boat, your crew. And you can also decide where you're going to navigate towards. If you work around innovation, there's also a lot of uncontrollables, things you cannot control. For example, new technologies that all of a sudden pop up, or competitors that are really launching the best product ever, or even stranger things like wars that break out. They can all damage your business model if you work around the theme of innovation. You can decide, though, with your innovation, who you bring on that ride, who's your innovation team. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So how can we make sure that we have the right people and the right circumstances to really conquer that wild sea of innovation? So I'm a startup culture evangelist. I give a lot of trainings to startups all over the world. And I know that not everybody here works for a startup or is a founder. However, you are interested in innovation. So there's a lot of things that you can learn from startup mindset and startup founders. And this is the Startup Culture Blueprint. We're not going to dive into all these elements. You can see that I highlighted two elements here, the feedback structure and the psychological safety. And we're going to dive in deeper into those two topics. Why? I will tell you that in a bit. So, what is psychological safety? I'm going to simplify it. For me, psychological safety is when there's a group of people where you can freely spread ideas, people are listening to ideas, people are trying out new ideas, and they're excited to work with new ideas, although they might fail, but they give the chance to try out new ideas. And on the other hand, that's the other side of psychological safety, is when there is a problem and people are able to really talk about problems and are able to speak and share those problems, because the only way to solve a problem is first to talk about it. So when you have that circumstances, then there is psychological safety, when there's freedom to talk about new ideas and about problems. So why are we going to focus on psychological safety? So I was in Zagreb in the beginning of the year. I was doing a keynote and a workshop at LEAP conference, and I got really interesting feedback from a couple of people in the audience. They told me, like, interesting what you're saying. However, here in Croatia, we are a little bit different in terms of the way of working. We're not so keen on giving feedback to everybody in the organization, and there's a strict hierarchy. And that made me think, like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So if I'm going to talk here again, then I should bring somebody that knows way more about the Croatian culture and has worked in Croatia and outside of Croatia. And we're going to dive into psychological safety within Croatia. And that's where I teamed up with Petra, who's going to tell you more about psychological safety within Croatia.
Do I go on this one? Okay, I'm going to go back. Hi, everyone. My name is Petra. I'm very happy to be here. Probably, as I said at the start, this is the most beautiful stage I've ever been at. So thank you to Tony, thank you to Romana and Nicolina for this really wonderful festival, for being here. So I'm a designer, researcher, activist, and a founder of PS Taboo, which is the first consultancy in the world that specializes in taboo topics. And I wanted to start with getting you a bit engaged. I hope it's not too late to get you a bit engaged. So if you feel comfortable, could you please raise your hand if in the last 3 to 5 months you were asked by your manager if you were happy with the company?
5
Okay.
people?
Yeah, I see a
6,
few
7.
of you. Okay, thank you very much. And now, can I ask you if in the last 3 to 5 months you were asked if you can give them a feedback or any way that you believe your company could be enhanced? So, any hands there? Okay. Well, I don't know if all of you others are solopreneurs or you have your own businesses, but as you can see, there's not too many hands, at least as far as I saw. And the reason why I asked you this was because this was the question that I got asked in the first 3 jobs that I got about 8 years ago when I moved away from Croatia. And the reaction that I had was that I froze. I absolutely froze when they asked me. And the reason was, one part was because I was at the start of my career, so it was like I was at the bottom of the hierarchy, so I never, ever expected for anyone to ask me that in my position. But the other part which I froze was because I didn't believe that my opinion in that position that I had actually mattered. And that's when, with a bit of time, I realized where culture plays a role. So culture is not just, a part of a religion, differences in rituals, differences in food. It also relates to the way we work and the way we relate at work. Now, in order to explore the differences in culture, I think we can refer to the Hofstede's 6 cultural dimensions. Hofstede was a researcher in IBM that gathered all of the data from IBM's offices around the world, and he gathered these 6 dimensions that would help in explaining the differences in culture and the ways for us to understand these cultures. And since we're talking about psychological safety, there are 2 elements that I think plays a role. One is power distance. So as we were mentioning about whether we have a flat hierarchy or whether we have a very high hierarchy, and whether we're actually comfortable with the fact that there is a small group of people that have a power, and uncertainty avoidance. So whether we prefer rules that is going to help us to avoid risks or whether we don't need the rules. And where does Croatia play a role? So at power distance, we are ranking at 80. And the neighboring Austria is the low of 11. And uncertainty avoidance, we are at 73. And the lowest is Denmark, which is 23. So there's a very huge gap there, right? And I think that somehow explains what Yair received of the differences in the way that we work. Now, if we want to explore how is actually the state of Croatia, one thing that we can refer to is the research from Galic and his colleagues who have, for the past 20 years, they have explored the way of work, and they have identified 6. I think there's a really thing about the number 6. There's 6 elements that help us to identify the really good work. And what they did, they compared Croatia to Europe. And as you can see, according to the graph, safety is number 1, so psychological and economical safety. And as you can see as well, is that we are quite behind the rest of Europe. Now, they didn't stop there. They also explored the differences between Croatians who are here and those that left. And the number is not different. So again, we have that basically easily to conclude is that immigrants are happier, people outside of Croatia is happier, Croatians are not happy with work. And I really wanted to know what is the impact of that number. And there is not a lot of research that you can actually get around that. I think that can also be the reason why we have such power distance as we have. But I did with my colleague a very small scale study. And originally what we thought was going to happen is we have lower productivity, lower motivation. But what we actually got to find is a lot of impact on our health. And you can see some of the quotes here. We also had a lot of therapy. We even have 2 instances of cancer. And I think what is really important for all of the employers here is that we had 72 people that left work due to this condition. Now, I'm sure a lot of you is going to say, well, we cannot be tiptoeing, people need to feel a bit of fear. They need to know that there's repercussions if they do a bad work. But if we actually look at the research from neuroscience on the impact of fear on productivity, we will find that it's not a good motivator. So the fear, what it does is that it impacts cognitive parts of our brain for analytical thinking, which prevents our creativity. And when it comes to interpersonal fear, we stop asking questions. We stop going into discussions. We don't do debates. And what that prevents is learning and progressing. So if we actually think about innovation is the ways that we can explore different things, that we can think about new methods of doing things, which involves trial and error. So what does research say about psychological safety? The first example, I think, is the Google Aristotle project, which explored 180 companies with 37,000 employees. And what was the first and the key differentiator from the most successful companies? It was psychological safety. And there's a number of research that shows us that employee engagement is higher, that the productivity is higher, creative and imaginative thinking, analytical thinking, decision-making, debates, experimentation. So all of these things help us to be innovative. So in conclusion, if you want to have an innovative company, you need to have good psychological safety. So how do we get there? Number 1 is create space for mistakes. So mistakes, I think the easiest way is if we actually see mistakes as trials, not as errors, as trials. And if you don't believe me, you can believe Canva, which is the graphical online platform, and it's the fastest growing unicorn. And what they did is that they changed the award wall into a failure wall, which showed all of the attempts that they did in order to get where they are. And in that way, they believe that they're going to destigmatize failure. And I think a sentence here seems fitting, which is fail often in order to succeed sooner. Number 2 is be guided by your intention and don't be a dick. Now, I can say this for myself. I know no one expects of us to be that toxic colleague, the toxic manager, the toxic boss. But the fact is that once we're actually really either under pressure of stress or when we're really passionate about our project, we tend to forget how we behave, and that impacts our relationships with our colleagues and with our employees. So for that fact, I want to share with you Kim Scott's Radical Candor, who also combined that aspect of challenging, which we need to do. We need to challenge if there is a failure. We need to challenge if there is something that needs to be changed. But it comes from the aspect of where the change is coming from. So whether we are motivated to be right, whether we're motivated to show someone that they're wrong, or if we actually care about the project and if we actually care about making the product well and going further. So have that in mind. And for the others, I'm going to give back to Jair.
Thank you, Petra. So the third point, how can we enhance psychological safety, is by being vulnerable. And I think being vulnerable is something that you probably already know, but it needs to be being vulnerable, but being intentful at the same time. Why are you being vulnerable? And what does being vulnerable really mean? So actually being vulnerable means telling your team, your colleagues, your co-founders that you don't know everything. You're not perfect. There are things that you don't know. If you can say like, hey, I hired you because you know this better, then you can really tap in that collective intelligence of the whole group because they feel, okay, yeah, actually I'm here to help you, right? So being vulnerable can be really, really powerful. If I look back at my own career, when I started at Airbnb, a company that's well known for having one of the best cultures in the world, in week 1, after week 1, my manager came to me and said, Jair, do you have any feedback actually for the team, for me? And I said like, wow, that's crazy. After week 1 already, I can give feedback on the company. It's like, okay, I'm really belonging here. I can really play a part. And I really felt a sense of belonging and creating the psychological safety for next time to bring up new ideas. The fourth point, and I think that's already really well established here in Croatia, and it's also what we're doing here, is meeting beyond work. What we found in research is that if you spend 50 hours with adults, grown-ups, in the same space, physical space, with some proximity together, you become light friends, yeah? Light friends. Babies, they need 30 seconds to become light friends, but for us it's 50 hours. If we are 50 hours together, I really feel that I know you, and I feel way more comfortable next time to bring up an idea, a problem, and we can share things way easier. People that interact more in the real life, they also would send more messages to each other. It's all proven. So if you have the chance, if you have a remote company, to bring people together, make sure that they spend those 50 hours together, and that will literally hack your psychological safety and your innovation power. So we're getting close to the end. Here's a summary of the things that we just mentioned. 1, create space for mistakes. Be guided by your intention and don't be a dick. It's clearly that Petra wrote that second one down. And then be prepared to be vulnerable. And 4, meet beyond work. So that's are the 4 takeaways here. Well, we started with the sea, remember? Let's go back to the sea. This ship is the Santa Fe. It was the worst performing nuclear submarine from the US Navy for a long time. Toxic culture, people not feeling safe, really low in the ranks, not performing well at all. However, this guy entered, Captain Marquez, and I would like you to remember his name, because Captain Marquez entered. What he did was, his first speech was saying, guys, I have some really big losses in my family. He was vulnerable. He said, I have some really big injuries in my leg. I'm not strong. I need you to be strong physically. He showed vulnerability. Second thing that he did, there was a big line for the lunch, and all the other captains that were in the ship, they would just skip the line and they start eating and take their plate. He would just wait in line. And the people in the ship said, like, no, wait, you can just go. He said, no, I'm one of you. We're doing this together. That really created that sense of belonging for everybody. They felt like, hey, I'm home here, because the captain is also waiting in line. Another thing that he did, he opened up his door, the open door policy. Open door policy, everybody could come directly to him, so he didn't have to go to the direct commander. He could just enter his office and just say, like, hey, this is wrong with the ship. I want to try this out. I want to try that out. So that really created also that that feedback structure, that everybody could be part of the improvements of the company. And also when something was tested out and it was failing, they would share it as a test, and an improvement would come after that, because they know that it was not working. So what happened? Captain Marquez and Santa Fe became the best performing ship in the US Navy. It's a true story. So actually the moral of the story here is to become a little bit more than Captain Marquez and embody psychological safety. With that, we're going to move over to the questions, and this is our way to connect with us if you want to stay in touch. Thank you, and let's move to the questions. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Yair and Petra. Another round of applause, please. A bit bigger this time, though. So you've had a bit of time to reflect on what they presented here. Do we have any questions in the crowd at all? Put your hand up, and I have a microphone coming to you. If not, then I'm going to ask Petra. We're in Dalmatia.
Yeah,
Vulnerability
I'm scared now.
and Dalmatinsi.
Yeah.
It's a bit of an oxymoron. So how can you encourage people to be a bit more vulnerable?
I don't know if it's appropriate to answer that. I'm gonna
It's fine,
have-
there's nothing that's... You've heard me speak this.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say get more rakia. We have a good one in the corner. No, but that's a good question. I think I can be frank here. We spoke about a lot of things. I do think, and very often I have the conversations that the vulnerability and the way that we express vulnerability is very different. And I do think that once I moved to the UK, actually. Oh.
Wow.
Yeah, I do think that the vulnerability there was much easier, and it was much different. It was much more welcomed. But I think this is also cultural aspects, right? We have 5 love languages, So we also, I think we have different ways to express our vulnerability and care. I don't know if that's the question that you were looking for.
And Yair, what about if you realize, you're talking about this to this audience, and what about if they realize actually they're part of creating this toxic culture? What do they do? How do they kind of do some self-reflection and adapt and change that? So there might be more ideas coming from their stuff.
I don't completely understand the question.
So if someone out here is a business owner, and they realize, shit, I'm the problem.
Okay.
What can they do?
I think that's there, right? Then the first step is taken, because if you say, I'm the problem, then you're vulnerable. So that's the first step. I think that's really good. If you're already aware of it, maybe there is some hacking in your organization. That's the first step. What's that? And then the other thing that I recommend would probably be the easiest to create psychological safety. Would just have one sentence ready. Do you have feedback for me? And if you have that, and people feel more safe to give that, then you're already really a step ahead, I guess.
They're trying to figure out who it is.
Was not working?
Did you hear? No, do it again.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. The answer
A bit closer.
The answer was on the first question.
Close. It's your friend. Your microphone is your friend.
Yes. So the answer, first one would be, if you're already identifying, like, hey, there's maybe something that I'm not doing, that's already the first step of vulnerability. So internally reflecting, like, hey, maybe I'm not being so open to my team. That's the first step, I guess. And then the second would be, it's a really easy question. Do you have feedback for me? If you are able to ask that question, you're able to take a big step towards psychological safety. Just the question, do you have feedback for me? Or maybe saying, I don't know, do you have an ID?
Okay.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Well, I just want to build upon what Yair mentioned, which is about, and I think this goes a bit further, which is about policies. And the reason why I'm saying it, because I spoke with a couple of companies about policies, especially when it comes to two things. One is mental health, and the second is sexuality and pronouns, which I know for Croatians, those that actually need the change of pronouns, they're like, we need to change pronouns. And the other group is like, why do we need to change pronouns? But I think the aspect here is about, as Yair mentioned, about asking feedback. It's also, if you want to take policies, bring your people to the table and make policies with them. Because you don't know what they need, they know what they need. And so have those conversations with them. Ask them, when you make some sort of rules and regulations in the office, does this sound good to you? Does this address what you need, or do you need something else? You cannot make policies, you cannot make any rules and regulations about your people without them. So a bit passionate answer, but it's the only way to go. Otherwise, you're going to have problems, and you're going to have people leaving your company, which is going to cost you money.
Okay, let's give one more round of applause to Yair and Petra. Thank you very much.
Hearing about how to